Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Go With Your Gut podcast. I am your host, Lauren Dreyer, and today we have such a fun guest. It is Rachael DeKoning, and we are talking about anxiety today because, well, let's face it, I'm pretty sure a lot of people deal with anxiety, and let's talk about a little bit more of how it affects us. So I will hand it over to Rachael and let her introduce herself, and then we will jump right in.
Yes. Hello. Thanks for having me. I'm Rachael DeKoning. I'm a licensed clinical marriage and family therapist and a licensed addiction counselor. So I specialize in working with anxiety. I also specialize in addiction. The two happen to be very highly connected, as you can imagine. But those are kind of where my passions lie. Of course, I work with all kinds of other stuff too, but that's currently what I kind of see the most of. And as you said, anxiety is running rampant right now. I would say everybody has it, even if they don't think they do, they probably do. Especially right now in the day and age we live in. But yeah, that's a little bit about me. I run anxiety groups, including an intensive outpatient program, and I own my own counseling practice. So called
All
Doors of
right.
Hope.
Absolutely. And we will have some information on her company in the show notes, but let's get started. So where I want to start with this is kind of what we both just said is anxiety is pretty much like everywhere. And I want to talk about, I don't feel like very many people know how to deal with it well. And so what do? We numb it.
Yeah.
So how have you seen that people do that? Because it seems like that's kind of where we go first.
Yeah. So usually, well, first and foremost, I think it's important to mention that there are some reasons why I think anxiety is presenting a lot higher right now than even when I first started as a therapist over a decade ago. One, I think, is kind of a positive, which is that we're talking about mental health a lot more. People are becoming more aware, especially men, even are getting kind of permission to be more aware of what's going on inside of themselves and identify when they're feeling anxiety and being able to talk about emotions. I mean, the teenagers make therapy look cool, which I'm not mad about. And, generation. So I think that's a real positive is that this pandemic and being isolated and the priority on physical health has kind of led us to realize that we can't have physical health without mental health. And so now people are much more likely to admit they're going to therapy, talk about going to therapy and anxiety, et cetera. So that's a good thing. On the flip side, as I was saying, like this pandemic forced a lot of people to do things that are similar to what we might do to numb our emotions. And so I think part of that was because we were forced to do that. A lot of people didn't choose that. They were forced to work from home and have poor work boundaries. And we were really put into this like fight, flight, or freeze mode. I mean, you turn on any channel of the news and you're basically dying tomorrow. So I think that this was a very real fear for a lot of people. And we know that anxiety is really connected to the limbic system of the brain, which is that fight, flight, or freeze response. And so when we have information coming to us constantly that we actually are in danger, our brain will respond accordingly to that. And then when you add that is for a chronic long period of time, I mean, there are still people deeply afraid of COVID, and there's some validity to that, but we won't get into the political realm. But the point is that we are now kind of stuck in this chronic stress mode. Our brain doesn't know what to do because it's been in fight or flight so long, and we're developing chronic symptoms of anxiety and stress, and that's manifesting in many different ways, both physically and emotionally. So people are coming to me, like, I've never struggled with anxiety before, I didn't know that I did, and now their bodies are producing this chronic stress kind of syndrome. So that's just a little bit about like why we're at where we're at, and I'm sure there are a million other factors, but how I see people dealing with that is I like to kind of put it in two different categories. People come in either avoiding or over controlling their feelings. So if we use anxiety as an example, and we could substitute that with shame, depression, loneliness, whatever.
Absolutely.
But in particular with anxiety, they're coming in and I'm asking them, okay, what have you been doing to try to manage this? Or how have you been responding to this? And most people are on these kind of polar opposite ends of the spectrum, which are actually two sides of the same coin, which is I'm avoiding it at all costs by missing opportunities, not going to social events, isolating and staying in bed. So that's kind of one category of avoidance. Add into that, substance use. And we've seen, I think everybody probably saw alcohol sales were at an all-time high during COVID. And so we're seeing a lot of increase in substance use, of course. And then on the other side of the spectrum, and these can kind of go together or switch back and forth, is the over control, the reactors, as I call them, the fixers, which is definitely me. I would go in the reaction category, where it's like you're hyper vigilant to it and you want to do everything you can to fix it right now. It's the people who want to answer their emails right away. They can't wait on an email, lacking work boundaries, not pausing before they're, wanting to fix a conflict in a relationship. So these two responses are ways that people are trying to manage their anxiety. And I should add over functioning into the reactive category, because that's a huge one for especially women, but really anyone can over function as a result of anxiety, which of course makes us more anxious. And then sometimes we add in numbing and it's a mess. But so that's kind of the long and short of how I see people trying to manage their anxiety when they present in to see me.
That's very interesting, because I see a lot of people going into that freeze mode because something happens and they don't know what to do, and it's like, I don't know how to respond to this. And that 100% used to be me, honestly. Like, something would happen and I'm like, I don't know how to handle this. I don't know what to do. So I'm just gonna sit here and I'm gonna go do something else. I'm gonna go distract myself, which not always a bad thing. Sometimes, you got to get up and walk away to be able to process that. But it seems like it's become, on that end of the spectrum, a large habit. Especially with social media, I don't want to deal with this because the feelings suck and I don't want to feel that. And I don't really want to deal with it. So we go to that social media or, substance abuse or whatever it is. And kind of like you said, it's all skyrocketed. But now that you say the other end of the spectrum, because me being a woman, I have kids, and you go to that over managing of, I have to do all of the things. And I never would have really put that in the same category as numbing, because we want to do all the things and we want to fix it.
Yeah.
You've got my wheels turning now.
Yeah. And it is two sides of the same coin, because whenever we're trying to overfunction, what we're essentially saying is, I can't sit with the discomfort of not doing anything or with resting. Because oftentimes, and I know this is true for me, of when I rest intentionally, not in a means of avoidance, when I rest intentionally, there's a certain level of anxiety that comes with that, right? I should be doing more. I have all this stuff that I need to be doing. I feel guilty, and shame comes with that. Sit with that and process through that, and learn to make intentional time for rest is much more difficult than just doing, right? It's like, I love Glennon Doyle's one of my favorite authors, and she uses this metaphor of like a snow globe, right? So like you shake up a snow globe and she's like, there's a dragon inside. And people who are over functioners or reactors, we're just keeping that snow globe as shaken as possible so we don't have to face the dragon that's on the inside of it, right? If I just keep doing and going, I don't have to like look inside of myself and really see who I am or what I want to be or what I'm doing with my life and how I could be doing it differently. And all of these questions that are really important to be asking ourselves, but it is a balance because we spend all of our time in unintentional, right? But I think they piggyback off of each other, because I'll ask you if this sounds familiar to you, because I'm sure a lot of the listeners, which is we go, we overfunction, we try to control all the facets of our life, and then we're freaking exhausted and we don't have the capacity to do anything else. And so now we're not intentional about our rest, we're burnt out, and then we're irritable, and then we're finally in bed, the kids are in bed, and we're scrolling on social media, and we're irritable and we're pissed off and we're exhausted, and yet we're not going to bed because it's our only amount of free time. And then here's the kicker. A lot of people add in things like alcohol use, right? Like, oh, the kids are finally in bed, mommy wine time. Let's go ahead and grab this glass of wine. And then guess what? Biological things happen in our brain that then make us actually more anxious the next day, even with one glass of wine. And it starts this vicious cycle of we're not getting adequate rest. We're not treating our body with care intentionally. We're burning out. We're breaking down, and then we're trying to get up and do it all again the next day. And eventually we're going to break. And I've broken in my life multiple times where it's like, okay, you're not going to do this for yourself. So God or higher power, whatever you want to call it, like, I'm going to do this for you. Like, I'm going to make you stop and rethink your life. And I don't want people to get to that point, but it can happen. And especially, like I said, with women.
Yeah. And, you know, in a lot of different scenarios, I've heard, which I've used this for myself, I'm sure that you probably have too, is, find your why. And a lot of people look inside for that. It's like, well, because I want it that dang bad. And I'm like, no, it needs to be outside of you, because when that time comes to take that rest that you need, or whatever it needs to be, you find the excuse to not do the thing that you need. And instead, it's, I'm going to do this for this person because I need to be there for them. Do I need to be there for me too? Sure. But for me, it was using that external person to where I'm like, I got to show up for them, which means I got to show up for me. And I totally relate to that. But I love talking about that feeling of burnout at the end of the day, because I'm guilty, but we get to that, do all the things during the day, and we have so much, everybody's got so much going on, right? And you get to that spot where like you literally lay down on the couch, wherever, and you're so exhausted, you can't mentally function anymore. Like, somebody asks you a question, you're going to snap, and then it is what it is. And you really do. You get to that point where you lay down and you're just done, and you shut off, and you don't get that time to organize what's going on and sit with, I don't know, whatever it is you need to sit with. And there are so many people, I know a few of them, I used to be one of them, I am no longer, that can't stand the silence because it forces them to be in their heads and deal with what's going on. And I think that's part of why I'm fascinated when you say that overdoing it is part of the numbing, because I think we're such a society these days of, I'm busier than you.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I Do I have a lot going on? Yeah, but that's not necessarily a good thing, right?
Right. Yeah.
So that's okay. That's some good perspective. So let's shift gears a little bit now. So how are some good ways
Mhm.
to deal with it instead of all of these different ways of avoidance? Let's be honest.
Yeah. Yeah. They're all rooted in avoidance, avoiding difficult feelings. Um, and I think what you said is important, and for some people that is very accurate, right? Like, let's look at my why. And for some people that is external, might be kids, or their job, whatever it is. And I think that's really important. And I think it's also important what you said about, well, I have to fill my cup before I can fill anyone else's, and we all know that, blah blah blah. And I'm sure I speak, but I think maybe the more important question, or thing to ponder is, what are my values?
Okay.
And because, again, going back to like when I see people come into therapy, their compass and how they're making decisions is based on their thoughts and feelings.
Yeah.
If I feel depressed, I'll isolate. If I think this person doesn't like me, I'm going to avoid them, right? These are our thoughts and feelings. And why should we not be using our thoughts and feelings as a compass? Well, they're inaccurate. They're real, they're valid, but they're not representative of our reality. I love this quote that says, thoughts are thoughts, feelings are feelings, none of it matters unless you give it meaning. And that's true. And oftentimes the meaning that we attribute to these thoughts and feelings is a meaning of reality. Like, well, if I feel depressed, that means I am depressed. And if I think this person doesn't like me, that means they really don't like me. So we don't understand that our mind and our emotional center is separate from us. And so, of course, if we're listening to our thoughts and feelings, we are going to be partaking in those avoidant behaviors. That is our gut instinct. That's the fight, flight, freeze response. I'm afraid, I'm going to run, right? Or avoid. And so when people come into therapy, we first take a look at those avoidant behaviors, and then we come to, well, what is actually important to you? And not what is easy, not what is going to lead you to the happiest life, because that's unrealistic. Not even on my best day am I happy all day. So happiness needs to no longer be the goal, which I think society just really screws with us on multiple levels when it comes to mental.
Absolutely.
The I'm busier than you, the we should all be happy, and that's the
Yeah.
goal. A load of BS. So instead, we want to look at, like, what fulfills me, like what feeds my soul, and what are those values, right? So that way, when I have a thought, I'm not using that as my compass. Instead, I'm asking myself, well, what do my values tell me to do in this moment? And we have to remember that values come in a platter, right? I don't just value compassion towards others. I value compassion towards others and compassion towards myself, and boundaries and assertiveness. And so we want to have a really good foundation. That's not to say our values don't change, they do.
Right.
But we want to have a really good foundation of, like, what are our values? Because that's going to tell us what we have, or what is best for us in the long run. And what we actually have control over, which is our actions and our intentions and our actions. And so when we do that, we can start to look at our life and these problems and how they present, and have a new place to put our energy. But that requires one other thing, which is, okay, people are like, great, okay, you're telling me to act on my values, cool. But what do I do with all of this discomfort? And that's where, in recent years in particular, we've really switched gears as therapists and said, we need to learn to accept. Like, let's stop fighting all of these feelings that we have zero control over. And sometimes people will question that. They're like, but I can control my feelings. I'm like, no, influence and control are two different things, and thoughts, the same thing, right? If I told you, I don't want you to think about ice cream right now, Lauren, what would you probably be starting to think about?
All the ice cream that I want.
Right. So it's like, we can pretend all we want that we've got control over these things, but we don't. So we have to learn to accept them, let them be. And there's a lot of like techniques involved in that. It's a simple concept, but it's not easy. And so that saves up a lot of energy when we're no longer ruminating over and overthinking and trying to figure out, we call it getting on the hamster wheel. When we're no longer getting on the hamster wheel, which requires a lot of energy, we can then put that energy into our values and what really matters to us, and just let our thoughts and feelings do whatever they want to do, because we're focused on what we actually have control over, which is our decisions around our values. That was a long answer, but
that is amazing, because I know a lot of people who, which we all know, I talk about it all the time. I am highly emotional. I own that. It is what it is. But I love that you talk about accepting that, because there's a lot of shame that I can see, and from all the things that I hear of the emotional person and all the things that we deal with. And I'm like, okay, but we're people. We have them. It doesn't matter who we are. And honestly, feeling the emotions and have something happening to us, for me, is like, okay, my body's telling me that something is going wrong. And instead of having to be like the perfect person and robot, because that does not exist, I mean, it's like, okay, where does it come from? Let's figure that out. And a lot of the anxiety that I deal with is, I mean, it's exactly like you said, sitting there and saying, okay, I don't know what to do with this. I'm going to sit here and stew on it and think about the fact that I don't want to be thinking about it. I don't want to be feeling it, instead of saying, okay, what do we do with this? What does this mean? And how do I process it, essentially, right?
Yeah, it's a delicate balance, because I'll use I like metaphors. Metaphors are big in the therapy world, and one that I really like is that thoughts and feelings are like a lemon. So if you're making lemonade and you're squeezing the lemon, there's only so much juice that you can get out of it before you're just trying to make the lemonade and wasting your time and your energy, and you're not getting anything out of it. Ooh. So thoughts and feelings are like that. There is some juice that we can gain from our thoughts and feelings. Not all of them. Some of them are rotten lemons and they keep getting put back in the pile. But some of them have a little bit of juice in there, and we want to gather that, right? That's the processing time. That's the time where we can say, okay, is this anxiety actually telling me something? Maybe all this anxiety I'm having about my job is actually telling me that it's not really in line with my values, and I need to make a change. But we're not going to spend an hour on that. Maybe journal for 15 minutes, get the juice, call a friend, talk to them about it. Whatever helps you kind of express and process those emotions in a really intentional and helpful way. That's not ruminating. It's not getting on the hamster wheel. It's asking myself, like, what is going to be helpful about what I'm feeling and thinking right now? And then how do I take that and put it into action in terms of my values, what I have control over, and what's going to be best for me in the long run? And it can be a very structured process, which I really like. And again, we're getting what we can out, and we're leaving the rest. Then we're letting the rest just float around, kind of like clouds in the sky. The feelings are still going to be there just because we've done our processing and we have a plan, potentially. I mean, sometimes sometimes they're just like, okay, well, that's pretty normal for me to feel because I have all this trauma in my life. Let's move on. But either way, we want to just let them kind of float around and be there while still being intentional about our actions, whether that has to do with the quote unquote problem or not.
Right. Okay. So I want to ask, because I've dealt with a lot of this personally, and I'm kind of curious as to your take on it. So obviously, like we all love feeling good, but
Yeah.
what happens when all of a sudden whatever in life comes at you and it becomes a, for me, it was always fear of whatever. And there's so much hype in the world right now about being fearless
Mm.
and, you know, being able to deal with it and be strong and all the things, which to some extent, okay, yeah, sure, be strong. And, but I'm, whenever something happens to me and all of a sudden I get that like nervous feeling in my stomach, my mind starts wandering all over the place. And it's that I don't know what to do. It's that fear of maybe, the unknown, or I don't know how to do this, or I don't know what's going to happen. And that's for me where a lot of, I attach anxiety to that a lot because like I obviously I've figured out that like, okay, I can figure it out. But that used to be where I would go and figure out how to numb myself, or I've now figured out for me how to take care of that in a healthy way for me. But what what would you say on that as far as attaching the anxiety to that fear aspect of maybe it's health, maybe it's work, maybe it's family, whatever that would be?
Yeah, I mean, that's essentially what anxiety is at the root, right? Like anxiety can feel just kind of like this baseline level of being on edge, but anxiety really is fear, and oftentimes it's fear of the unknown, fear of uncertainty, and usually fear is attached to what we care about the most. So again, fear isn't useless completely. Like if we're
Right.
afraid of something, it probably means that there's a value attached to that in some way, just probably a better way that we can go about attaining that value, or living that value. Um, so if it's family, for example, and I'm fearful, I get clients who have fears attached to like their children's well-being. Well, let's be honest, most of us do, but extremes, right, where they develop OCD
Yeah.
tendencies or around their children's life, and things like that. And of course there's that value there of I really care about my children, and their well-being, but the kind of insanity of it is that they're trying to control something that's not in their control.
Mm,
And the more we try to control the things we can't control, the more we lose control over the things we can control. And so these people are feeling like they're going crazy because they're not seeing any benefits to all of the energy that they're putting into trying to control, for example, the safety of their children. Or worse yet, they are seeing a little bit of pay back for that. And it's just enough to keep them doing what they're doing. But the thing that's, or what's hurting them is that they cannot prioritize anything else because all their energy is being put towards this one aspect of their life. So yeah, I hear you when you say like be fearless or strong. I hate that. There's just no such thing, and it sends this really unrealistic expectation into the world. And just like you said, like emotions need to be more normalized, especially for men. And just like, again, seeing that as a really important part of the human experience. In fact, if we are feeling the full spectrum of emotions and we're really like feeling it, we're doing something right. It means we're really living. Like, when I quit drinking, I felt the full spectrum of human emotions like I had never experienced in my life. And that was really amazing and beautiful. And there were times where it really sucked and still does. And I think that means I'm doing it right, And so we have to remember that fear is not something to fear.
yeah.
We can and we can acknowledge it. We do not have to like feed into it, if that makes sense. I don't know if that answered your question.
No, it did, because like, I mean, I was kind of going for the whole in general, like we need some sense of fear. And for me, I've figured out, I mean, it comes in all the time and I have to figure out new ways. But whenever something used to happen to me that I was terrified of, which, let's be honest, was a lot.
Yeah.
It's okay, how do I do this new thing? And what do I do? And I had no idea. But the more I started to say, okay, this keeps happening. How do I feel it, honestly? And it's for me been learning to say, okay, there's that like nervous feeling again, and me trying to talk myself out of this, or me trying to put a label on it that doesn't need to be there, honestly, and is not true. And I mean, it's different for everybody, but figuring out how to shift your mindset and say, I see that, this is happening, but now what do I do with it? Because honestly, the faster for me that you can learn to do that and say, okay, let's do what we need to do with it. And then it leaves instead of sitting there and ruminating on it. And you're kind of like, oh, okay, that wasn't as bad as I thought. But you have to feel the dang feeling. And
yeah. And I will say, like, again, balance is everything. And this is all counterintuitive. I mean, it's like a Chinese finger trap, right? Our gut want to pull away from these things, and I'm telling you to lean into it, and you don't like me right now, and not you in particular, probably some people don't, but I think the important thing to remember is that we don't want to rush to fix feelings too quickly, and we don't want to be too slow with identifying our feelings. It's really about a balance. And so I always tell, a good rule of thumb is like, ground yourself first. Don't even touch the feeling yet. Like, let's first just get to a place where we're more, because truly if we're really in the midst of a difficult emotion, there's no amount of juice that's going to come out of that lemon. It's, just been in the freezer or something. And so we've got to let it thaw out. And part of that means turning on our prefrontal cortex. So doing some of those like helpful and simple grounding activities like breathing, or 5 4 3 2 1, which is picking out 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can smell, 2 things you can taste. I got it wrong. It doesn't matter. But focusing on your senses and really getting present. And then once we notice that we're a little bit more calm, that's when we can kind of look at that emotion and say, okay, what is this trying to tell me? Am I really in danger here? Usually it's helpful to call someone who's a little more objective and be like, am I really in danger here? And they're gonna be like, no. So don't be afraid to use other people. Support is there for a reason. They call it self-help, but it's really not. Like, we need other people to support us and, take us off the ledge sometimes. And so then getting that juice out of there, and then asking ourselves, like, okay, so now, given what I've kind of figured out about the situation and what the juice is, then what do my values tell me to do? So, if I'm, for example, really anxious about something happening to my child, well, if I call a friend and I think about, okay, some of that fear is normal and valid, right? Like, they're this little tiny human being that is relying on me for their life. So there's some validity to that. But what is like an objective way to act on my values? Well, it might mean, I'm in a car. Sorry, I'm getting a call here. I'm going to put him in a car seat and I'm going to buckle him up, but I'm not going to pull over on the side of the road 5 times while I'm driving to the store, and also remembering that anytime we don't act on our fears, or we have a difficult experience that we're kind of pushing ourselves through, we call that an exposure. We're growing, we're raising our tolerance for anxiety. So even if it's just limiting it down to, okay, I'm going to only pull over 3 times instead of 4, like we're still moving ourselves forward in that process. I'm sure there's a lot more I could say about that, but I think, the important thing is to first bring ourselves into a place of being more grounded, then kind of figuring out what the juice is, and then we apply that to our values. And worst case scenario, we decide, you know what, I still don't really know about what to do with this situation. Sometimes things just resolve themselves, which is like a new epiphany for me, even though I've been alive for this long. Like things don't need my attention. Like they will just resolve themselves. And because I'm so much more on the reactive end of the spectrum, that's important for me to hear. Maybe someone on the other end needs to know that they need to do something. But for me, it's important for me to remember, like, listen, I am not playing God here. This will get resolved if I wait a day or a week, even sometimes, and recognizing sometimes doing nothing is the value oriented action for someone like me. So getting probably good too, so you can really figure out like what objectively are your values telling you to do in those moments of anxiety, because it differs.
It does. And I mean, I've had to absolutely do that of, this person just said something that, got me all hyped up and I want to go blow up at him. I'm going to not answer this email and I'm going to go back tomorrow to when I can be level-headed and not say something that I don't mean. And get myself grounded and take the emotions out of it, right?
And what you have to sit with for the next 24 hours.
Yeah.
Probably anxiety, right?
Yeah.
And that's what, let's answer the email. Let's get this over with so I don't have to think about it.
Yeah.
And then say, actually, I'm going to sit on this for a day.
Yeah.
Ooh, yeah, no thanks. But that's truly where the work happens, is being able to say, you know what, I allow this anxiety to exist. And for some healthy distraction can be good, right? Like I'm gonna sit to the side and I'm going to focus on being present with my kids, or I'm going to bake, or, whatever, something in line with your values.
Absolutely. Well, Rachael, thank you so much for being on here with me today. I learned a lot of new stuff that I didn't know, and I deal with this stuff a lot. Not more than you, but a lot.
Yeah.
All right, y'all. Well, I will leave in the show notes where to get a hold of Rachael and Doors of Hope, her business. And as always, guys, go with that gut and then keep going and doing what you need to do for you.
Yeah. All right. Thanks.